Good morning, everyone. So, God wants you to be you. Now, we all know that He wants us to be much better than we are, but still, God wants you to be you. Not only does God love us, despite our flaws, and always forgives us and welcomes us back when we go astray, but God also appreciates and uses our individuality to help us find a path home. Now, this doesn't mean that we're given a pass or the standards are lowered for us in any way. What it does mean is that God sees what we do right, even when we really mess up, and delights in our trying, even when we fall on our faces. So, if we're going to talk today about God wanting you to be you, who are you? That's the first question, right? Well, let's give some answers to that. Right? So one answer is an individual. And that one we have some evidence for when we're sitting here in time and space in a body. I see you, I can see me. It's fairly easy to see that individuality and those different gifts that were spoken of in 1 Corinthians. You are part of the one, the indivisible, infinite light. Now that's something, if we take a deep breath and we go within, there's some part of us that knows the truth of that. And there are those moments when we've really experienced it, but it's usually more of an ineffable thing. It doesn't have quite the same tangible sense usually that being an individual has. And yet there it is. Another answer is that we're both. And one of the ways we see that is by looking at the masters, because we see all of these different colors and tones and voices, all these different qualities, but they're all drawing us towards the same place. So when we look at the masters, is one of the things that really gives us that sense of being both the one and the unique. Now, when we drop down to earth and we look at this dichotomy, and it's really, I think, only down here on earth that this really looks like a dichotomy. I think as we go deeper into this, we're going to see that being the one and being an individual, that these things are not in conflict at all. However, here we are in the earth, and we see manifestations of these two different things in the earth, and a lot of times it's not pretty, right? So, for example, we see that glorification of this lower human self, right? That this concept of the individual is something we see in worship of celebrity and power games and vain, pointless competition and greed. And then on the other side of that, we've got this worldly version of we are all one, which is commonly used as a trick by people who want to tell you what to think and bypass your individual conscience. Right? So there's this con where they tell you, if you really cared about the whole, If you really cared about everyone, you wouldn't need a nation or a family or any true co-creativity with God, any real individual path, right? You just become this indistinct blob, and we're also going to tell you the shape and the color that this blob needs to be. And we're going to characterize any individual discernment you may have as some kind of selfishness or bigotry, right? And so what we're really seeing here is the glorification of the individual human. That's the competition and the celebrity, versus the glorification of the human collective, right? So really, both of these perversions, both of these ugly things we see are really, these attempts to live in a world without God, without the one. And it's this idea that human plus human plus human plus human equals God, right? Which is nonsense. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about the one. So we do have this concept of higher and lower, and that makes sense, and this concept of the one and the individual. And so these binaries, right? They're useful. They help us to understand, but they're also abused in a way. So one of the masters we're going to be working with today is Lord Lonto. Some excerpts from Understanding Yourself, chapters 2 and chapters 5. And so we're going to start off with this short passage. There are many weapons which the Dark Ones have employed to keep mankind from discovering the real self. The most darkening of all is the screen of egoistic, self-centered consciousness and that altogether human quality of pride, which so readily saturates the being of man. Beloved ones, pride is so subtle that individuals often mistake it for spiritual zeal. So that's a really interesting one to think about for a moment, right? Because when we look at some of the stuff that goes on in the world, it's not too hard to spot the pride. And then, of course, even in the spiritual world, there's a place where we can see perhaps pride being mistaken for spiritual zeal, right? And that might be, that image of the Chela who's, inwardly or outwardly involved in, deciding what's holy and what's not, right? So we all have some version of that in ourselves, I think, that we've grappled with at one time or another, having those moments where we're really trying to learn that we're not here to judge. But then there's this less obvious, this really subtle, as he says, the human pride is so subtle. And the other side of that is this keeping silent to avoid being wrong, right? Or just staying home to avoid sinning. Now, in the world, we do see people right now keeping silent to avoid being canceled, because they're not sure, if in the last 5 minutes what you're allowed to say has changed, and for sure some of that is fear, because it's certainly unpleasant to have people come after you. But of course, this stuff wouldn't work at all if it didn't have that pride mechanism in it as well, because what sells stuff like that is that it offers the opportunity to feel righteous, right? Or to feel morally superior, to be up on, to be the one who does know what you're allowed to say, right? And so a lot of that is about sort of very nasty nonsense. But this also applies to important things, right? That we see these situations where, you know, someone needs to open their mouth and say something, and you know that if it's you, you might get some piece of it totally wrong, or you might be giving a sermon where you have to talk about the senators, and you know that you're not going to get every detail right, and that there might be someone listening who knows that detail better than you. However, right, that's a subtle pride mechanism to think, oh, I better be careful, I better not make a mistake, because I'm one of those people who's just a little bit too special, a little bit too good to ever make a mistake, right? And that's pretty silly. And one of the things we're going to see in this process and the stuff we're talking about today is that we learn by trying, we learn by doing. And that when we get it right, that's a victory. And then when we get it wrong, if we get it wrong with the right attitude, then that's a victory too. Every correction is a victory. So we need to not just get off our high horse about others, we also need to get off our high horse about ourselves and embrace this process, even though it's not always pretty, it's not always as smooth as we'd like it to be. So one of the things that came up a little bit in this, in the first things I was saying, is that there's this distinction between the human and the individual. The human self, concerned with survival in time and space to the exclusion of everything else. Sometimes talked about as the carnal self, the carnal mind. And this self is mostly individual in the sense that it sees itself as separate. It separates itself in consciousness from God and from other men. Right? So we all know that what that self looks like. But even here, the seeds of the divine individuality can be seen. Right? For example, even the one operating out of selfishness may at some point realize that he'll get more of what he wants by cooperating with others, right? That is opening a door towards less separation. Now, it's not perfect. That's probably not the greatest motivation, but that's not what matters at this level, because God directs us to use anything that can be used to lead us home. So this binary of higher and lower, this binary of individual and God, I think as we go deeper into it, what we start to see is that it's not really an either or, it's not an on-off switch, it's not you're either here or you're there, but it's more of a fractal, which is just a fancy way of saying self-similarity, that the patterns and the geometry seen in the greatest mountain are also seen in the smallest pile of rocks and dirt. And so even down there in the dirt, there's that seed of divine individuality, the path home. Now the individual, when we speak of the individual, we see unique talents and gifts. We also see a specific set of obstacles that need to be overcome. So this path home to God, this combination of talents and gifts, plus the obstacles that need to be overcome, is in and of itself has a uniqueness to it. Because the individual has free will. So interestingly, the individual is the one to choose to master the carnal nature, to overcome the prideful egoic self. It's not something that God does for us, and it's not something that it is enough to just embrace the light. we also have to choose, right, to overcome those obstacles. And we also have to choose to use those special talents and gifts that we've got that we can uniquely express as a service to our brothers and sisters and as a service to God. So it's in the individual that we actually can learn to see that individuality as an expression of God. So God calls on us to overcome the human self while expanding and expressing the unique gifts of the individual, all the while knowing the oneness of all life and knowing that even our own individuality is the action and the being of God. Now, in a sermon I listened to some months back by Mark Prophet, he says that ego isn't bad, it's a horse you ride. What does that mean? So you have a perspective, you have desires. Right? Maybe you want to build something, or maybe there's something you see that you don't like in the world that you want to change, or you want to be great at something, right? None of these desires are perfect in their original form, but that's not the point. These things are a vehicle for growth. They're a horse you ride, or a vehicle for your growth. What does that mean? Well, the music we listened to before I started speaking is from a guitarist named Pat Metheny. And when I was 18, 19, 20, this guy was just absolutely my hero. And one of the things I found out, I'd been listening a lot to his first album, which is I think from 1976. And I found out that he was, I think, 22 or 23 when he made this record. And so I decided when I was about 20, I was like, okay, I got a couple more years to be as good as him. Now, that's something that I chuckle at now, and because it was some years before I really came to understand that he is, one of the greatest guitar virtuosos to have walked the earth. Not only that, he was a prodigy of the level where during his first year of college level music school, he dropped out because they invited him to join the faculty. So I laughed at that, but I look at it, I'm like, hey, good for you, kid. You really want to be great. So what's in that, right? And what happened as a result of that wanting to be great? Well, a lot of things come up, First of all, what does it feel like to be, to be really good? I was really good, but not as good as you want to be. What do you bump into when you're trying to do that stuff for the sake of your human ego, right? What sorts of feelings and experience and disappointments and conflicts come up as a result of that? So this is long before I was necessarily thinking about it in the terms we're talking about it today. But that desire to be great, that very specific desire, that was a vehicle for my growth that took me to confront a lot of things in myself. And everybody has versions of that. And so that vehicle leads us to try, and by trying, that's how you reveal where your talents are, but where they're also intermingled and trapped with misqualified energy. Right? So through this process, we're separating the real from the unreal. But to get that greatest growth, right, where you really separate the real from the unreal, we have to eventually learn how to do what we're doing, to pursue what we're pursuing as a way of seeking the Christ, to go beyond that desire, to go beyond the place where it remains an ego desire always, and we let that seed grow into what it's meant to grow into, where we really let the light in and we ride that horse where it's intended to go. So we have to do it with love. We have to discover how to do it as service. And then we have to learn how to do it with that care that comes with knowing that Longfellow says that the gods see all. So that infinite care and responsibility. So now that we've looked a little bit at this process from that individual perspective on earth, who's looking up, right? And we know we're headed towards heaven. We know we're headed towards that higher consciousness. But now we're going to spend a little bit of time with John the Beloved in heaven, and look at that love and acting with love and seeking the Christ and being of service. This is from 1990 dictation entitled "Be Led by Love in All Ways." I'm going to read some of it and then talk about it a bit. My desire for you, and I pray that it be your desire for yourself, is that you might cross this land up and down, east and west, as ministers of Christ's healing love. The love you must bring, beloved, is his love, and therefore you must make it your own. Human love is not enough to bring surcease from deep sorrow and inner pain and anguish. Nice words and sympathy do not heal the broken heart. Moreover, they often exacerbate the agony. They are hollow when spoken to the one who is crucified. Now, the essential core that we're going to look at today of that is the love you must bring, beloved, is his love, and therefore you must make it your own. So while John is certainly calling us specifically to be ministers of Christ, right? And in that he's saying, I'm not talking about going out and talking about Christ or saying things about Christ's love. No, you have to bring that love. So the message is going to be you becoming that love. The messenger must become the message. And what this applies to every individual ministry, right? And every individual expression. Whatever it is we're called to share with the world, we have to embody it, and we have to embody something that is truly of value, which involves shedding that selfishness and that thing existing as an ego desire and becoming this transcendent thing. John continues, let the ruby fire burn in you. Do not fear it. Do not shun it. Do not shield yourself against it. For the ruby fire to burn, beloved, you must know what is true selflessness. Yet you must be unconscious of it. To be selfless and not even have a thought of being in that state is true selflessness. To be unconscious of the sense of serving and being the servant, yet to be that servant, this is pure love. To seek no reward save Christ and Christ resurrected in you. This truly allows you to step apart from the old self, to step apart, beloved, and not even sense the loss. For in truth there is none. You need not be concerned, for the law will not allow you to step apart from yourself until you have already become acquainted with the new self, the new creature in Christ, and the Christ self in you. Surrender unto God is a mystery. The mystery is known by those who have become that mystery. So the surrender unto God is a mystery. This place where the individual and the individual as the one limitless light, this surrender unto God, this is a mystery that is only known to those who have crossed that threshold and completed that mission, right? The way we get there, to seek no reward save Christ and Christ resurrected in you. That whatever that passion is, whatever that desire, that vehicle that you ride, that has this potential to become this project that is simply seeking the reward of Christ, to simply seek the process of becoming the Christ. And then, as he says, you will step apart from your old self and not even sense that loss, for in truth there is none. Now, when I'm reading these words and when I'm with John, sharing with us this beautiful light and this love, I feel that bliss. I mean, it's just the express train to heaven, and I just want to stay there all day. But then, for one reason or another, you're back in the world and you have to confront getting from here to there, right? What does that look like, putting it all together? And another, interesting piece of this is that seeking that light in that moment of transcendent bliss is very important. Expanding the sense of the God presence, right? But at the same time, even when I was working on this sermon today, I had this moment, where after really digging into reading the whole dictation that this came from, I was so floating around up there, just sitting there going, okay, this is great. What do I do next? And then eventually comes through, like, well, how about you get back to work? And then I'll tell you that there's this place in us where we can go, okay, God, I need you to, it feels good to be in your presence. I need you to take care of the rest of this thing for me, because I like being here. I like it better than the part where I'm back in the earth and I'm working it out. Right? So that's what that looked like. Okay, get back into it, engage the gears, let the rubber meet the road. Not be paralyzed by that bliss, and just get down to it. So when you get down to it, right, the trick is to not get so lost in the process of doing the work in the earthly way that you forget about the God presence, right? That's the flip side of it. I just want to disappear into God and stop trying. Or I get into it and I go, hey, I got this, and we get lost. I was trying to, as I was thinking about what is this process of being the earth and engaging your free will and making that effort, but having it perfectly balanced with that God presence. There were a couple of images that were given to me, and one was this thing that now sounds incredibly old-fashioned, which is going on a long road trip with a paper map. Because the thing about that paper map was that you couldn't read it while you were driving. Right? And so what the reason that image comes to me is because we are given the guidance. We are given the map. Very often, though, just the piece of the map that we need. And then it's our job when using it to take it in, do the best to understand the next few steps, and then keep your eye on the road, right? But then check so often, and then just as I was writing that down, the day that I saw that, I also had an image of being out with one of our dogs, and when dog is a good dog, they're going to go out ahead of you when they're off the leash and smell everything and just, be there in the experience. What do they do every so often? Look back, go, hey, is this right? Are we going in the right direction? So I've been trying to be a good dog for the past week as I've been finishing this up. And here's the thing. because of that process. Because you have to take in what you can and then you have to be in the world and try, you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna take wrong turns. You're gonna smell something good and go get lost in the bushes, right? It's just that this isn't a problem. This is by design. This is how it works. It's why we're here. And what's revealed in doing that is the real. We're separating the real from the unreal. We're separating the things that are just that earthly human self, and then the things that have that heavenly quality. And we're always exploring both. All right, so if we're confronting this problem of being here and wanting to be there, and I think what we're realizing is that we're really always both places, regardless of what we think. I'm going to go back to Lanto and let him explain some of this to us. The great doer is always the eternal one, who employs the hands and feet of humanity as well as their consciousness, their mind, and their will, but never without the consent of the individual. It is his intent to turn over to the individual just as soon as he has demonstrated his capacity and worth to receive it, the full employment of his God-given talents. The correct use of these talents is always under the direction of the genius which God has implanted within the mortal consciousness. This genius is truly a manifestation of the infinite law that lives and moves in the finite world. That surrender unto God is a mystery, yes, but boy, is that a great explanation, probably the best we could get of what it's like to be in both places, for there to be that perfect balance of the one and the individual. But when we're doing that, there are other things that come up. So Lanto continues, with all of their hearts, men should guard their consciousness against the Luciferian attitude of human pride. With few exceptions, the people evolving upon this planet have lurking within their consciousness the quality of pride which shows its face when individuals allow themselves to become piqued over little things. The spiritually progressive life stream, who's willing to engage in a bit of introspection, should note as an indication of personal pride the fact that he becomes annoyed or angry with others over trifles or unimportant matters that ought not to make any difference. One should learn balance and reasonability, giving unto others the same grace that one expects to receive. Through inward delight in the law of God, a man can reach the point where he is able to withstand the onslaught of excess emotionalism and hold himself in the balance of the universal light, even when his sensitive nature causes him to feel the pain of anger or regret concerning the conduct of another. Self-control, that is, control of the emotions and the feeling world, is one of the keys to self-mastery, which some of our disciples find difficult to employ. So notice that he draws attention to this, to being piqued or angry or annoyed with others or with these situations as an indicator of pride, right? Not as an indicator that we sometimes think that, the problem is that everyone else is being a dummy, or to the spiritually aware individual, it's also not an awareness that I am a jerk, right? He's drawing attention to say, this is an indicator of pride. So just keep an eye on it, because you don't want that. It's not doing you any good. It's just creating this imbalance between the individual and the surrender to the light. Then he goes on, because the individual identifies with his consciousness, he is sensitive to circumstances which invade his consciousness and which he may interpret as an affront to his own life. By identifying with all life, right while he maintains an awareness of his personal function and a sense of his personal mission, he can easily understand why individuals may act or react as they do. This understanding will spread the oil of tranquility on the troubled waters of human affairs. Above all, the self should remain poised, yet not aloof or without compassion for the problems of others. So that's amazing. By identifying with all life, right, while he maintains an awareness of his personal function, right? So by being here and there, identifying with all life, it's not in conflict with that individual sense, or there's an awareness of your personal mission. And that by doing this, he can easily understand why the individuals may act or react as they do. So that, in other words, this expansion of the consciousness to be in both places actually is this powerful tool, is this powerful expression, this powerful empathy for helping others to spread the oil of tranquility, right? Because you identify with all life and because you identify with the individual, that is the true universal empathetic sense. And so by meeting this challenge, we can become these true ministers of the spirit that John is talking about, where we're compassionate, we're humble, we're helpful. And the messenger truly becomes the message. Then Lanto continues, training in sensitivity to Christ is advocated by the Brotherhood. But we would point out that involvement in psychic sensitizing and improper physical contact with others, which comes under the heading of sensitivity training, is a dangerous procedure which can very easily bring about the demise of needed individuality. Men need to preserve the individual while they attain spiritual identification with the real self. So this is really interesting. There's a few things in there. One is that, I actually did a little research about when this was written and sensitivity training, which is of course really the progenitor of today's modern diversity training and encounter groups and all of these things. Which it turns out that when it was studied, one of the conclusions that they came to, that a lot of this stuff doesn't really help anybody. But the only people it seems to help are the people with the biggest, strongest egos, which I thought was very interesting. Because he's saying it's a dangerous procedure which can very easily bring about the demise of needed individuality, right? So there's this other con going on in the world where the individual is identified as the locus of all that is wrong, right? So we need to beat up and beat down and dismantle the individual to make you and to make the world a better place. And it's real clear in here that that's not what's going on. Men need to preserve the individual self while they attain spiritual identification with the real self. Expanding that sense of identification, one can include as part of his own self-awareness the God presence in all life. And he need not explore the human psyche or physique in order to achieve this awareness. He need not explore the human psyche in order to achieve this awareness, right? So what's in there is that what we're not doing is obsessing over the human psyche and the human individual and figuring out, how do I take this apart? No, we are expanding our sense to include the God presence in all life. And that you only need to explore your psychology or the human psyche to the extent that it helps you do this, right? It can be useful to have bits and pieces of information, say, oh, that's where that comes from, that's where that comes from. And we got to move on, because what we're looking to do is expand the awareness of the God presence. And either that's happening or it's not. And if it's not, we know where to put our focus. Lanto continues, in one sense, all life is one, and this is the highest sense. But in the lower senses, there are many snares and tangles to be avoided. Through discretion, Christ's discrimination, and holy prayer, men retain their divine dignity, which does not preclude the possibility of the effervescing of the self in humor, truism, and perpetual joyousness. Such dignity is never overcome by person, place, condition, or thing. So to me, this sounds like the description of someone with a really good attitude. Someone who's here and there at the same time. Through prayer, Christ's discrimination, through seeking that divine dignity, that God awareness. But it does not stop the individual from effervescing in the world. It's beautiful. So, God and individual, I believe, it's not a dichotomy. It's an alchemy. It's really what we're talking about here, that there is a mystery of how these things are perceived and how they come together. Lantos says, man is transported out of the confines of his mortal sense into spiritual realms of thought when he contacts the vital flames of the very essence of the Creator's consciousness. The desire to be transported out of the realm of the ordinary is tantamount to invocation. But when men also express a willingness to be decontaminated of all undesirable qualities, they open the floodgates of their consciousness to the light, which then rushes in to expurgate all unwanted vibratory actions. So, when man is transported out of the confines of his mortal sense into spiritual realms, right, we float up to heaven like we did with John, and we're transported from the mortal to the spiritual. And then we bring that spiritual awareness into the earth, where we express a willingness to be decontaminated. You see how gentle that is? We just need a willingness. How much of our contamination is due to unwillingness? How important is it to be aware? Because this being purified by the light is done by law. It's not some special exception that we have to beg for, right? Because we're so rotten. We demonstrate our willingness by reporting those undesirable qualities, not by denying or concealing them, right? So we engage our free will and we ride that horse. And then in that process, we see those undesirable qualities, right? And if you see something, say something. You just report it. And you have that willingness. There's no shame. You're just allowing the law to work. You're just participating in this alchemy. Beneath the surface calm, Lantos says, there lies within the consciousness of men much that is undesirable. Much that represents the polarization of imperfection during near and distant epochs of personal history. To cast out the enemy within by invoking the sacred fire is a necessary process. When this is done, transmutation takes place, and the energies that have been imprisoned in matrices of imperfect thought and feeling are released. So we have this unique pattern of gifts which are intermingled with and trapped by, right? This qualified energy. What does he call? Matrices of imperfect thought and feeling. And our job is to give it to God, to invoke the sacred fire, to call for it to be transmuted in the violet flame. So the most important thing is to call on God. We're all these nodes in the body of God. Don't take it so personally. You're just reporting something you're seeing. You're going, hey, this doesn't seem great. Can we purify this? I'm willing to bear whatever discomfort purifying this causes. And God is not asking us in doing that to vanish into him, right? And to give up our gifts and our work. It's just saying to release those trapped energies so that we can receive and share the full measure of our talents. And again, from earlier in the quote, I'm just going to repeat that line. It is his intent to turn over to the individual just as soon as he has demonstrated his capacity and worth to receive it, the full employment of his God-given talents. Okay, so that's where our focus is. Okay, we can't get too focused on these horrors of the human self, because first of all, we've already established that what we're doing is not taking apart the human self, we're expanding the God awareness. The other pitfall that comes with focusing on the horrors of the human self is this very subtle sin, this subtle pride, which is remaining inert in the hope that at least we won't make anything worse. Right? We say, thank you, God, for these gifts, but I'm too flawed. I'm no good. I need you to take care of this for me. I can't be trusted, so I'm out. You don't want to do that. So it's like saying, God, do it for me versus saying, God, do it through me, right? When we say, mighty I am, take command, that's do it through me. That is us identifying with the light and giving over those misqualified energies to God for transmutation. But if we're going, I'm helpless, I'm bad, I'm all these things, it's essentially this pride mechanism of saying, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to look bad. I'm special in some bad way, so it's on you, God, to take care of it. So this road to this selflessness that is so true that we're not even aware of it, this mastery that John is talking about. The road there is trying with humility and love, right? Which is also trying for the sake of learning. Or building with infinite beauty and care so we can be taught infinite beauty and care. And a way to practice this, sometimes it's hard with ourselves, right? Another way to practice this is to look at the world around us and look at others and people that you may, it doesn't matter, to see, but to look at others and to practice that God consciousness of seeing what they're doing right first. And anything that seems wrong, to be incredibly kind about it and just share what you see with God. For me, there have been many artists and musicians where over time there's been this process of discernment where I look at that and I say, that's for me. I love that. I love how prolific he was. I love how he stuck to his own vision, even when other people and record companies were telling him otherwise. And he was never intimidated, I think that's great. And to say, it seems like he could have been better to his family, or the music had some really cynical messages in it, say, that doesn't seem great. I don't think I want that, right? And just as it's not our place to judge, it's not our place for our discernment to be absolutely perfect for the things that we admire, because we're going to learn by trying. We're going to ask that question and say, well, what is that being prolific or that sticking to your own vision, right? And as long as we have that willingness to have the undesirable qualities expurgated by the light, we can't really lose. So let's talk more about this process of service, of sacrifice, and of being dedicated to seeking the Christ in all that we do. And to do that, we're going to return to this dictation of John the Beloved, where he says, to be selfless and not even have a thought of being in that state is true selflessness. Thus, sacrifice is the same. Those who think they sacrifice do not. For you should not be conscious of sacrifices, so caught up should you be in the Holy Spirit, in the sheer joy of love and the perpetually flowing love that comes through as you serve him. The love of Christ is your love of the soul and your love of the human self that cannot figure out how to get out of itself, how to escape the conundrum of being human. I will tell you the secret, beloved. Becoming the Christ, loving the Christ, the individual, by and by, finds himself no longer in the human socket. To be unconscious of the sense of serving and being the servant, yet to be that servant, this is pure love. To seek no reward save Christ and Christ resurrected in you, this truly allows you to step apart from the old self. To step apart, beloved, and not even sense the loss, for in truth there is none. You need not be concerned, for the law will not allow you to step apart from yourself until you have already become acquainted with the new self, the new creature in Christ, and the Christ self in you. So you don't deconstruct the old thing. You become the new thing by and by, and the old thing is revealed not to be real. And I found, as I was working on this, I felt this call to really say, okay, well, to practice quite literally what I am preaching, and it has been very interesting to see what these experiments are to lead with love in all ways, as John says. One very interesting one was at the end of a long day of working on this talk and working on other things, sometimes very, very tired at night, and I don't particularly feel like cleaning up after myself after I've made dinner. And there was this thought, though, that, well, if you want to make the kitchen beautiful, then do it in a beautiful way. Do it with a beautiful spirit. And figured, well, if this is the law, it's at least worth giving it a try, no matter how tired I am. And it was truly remarkable that just setting that intention, the amount that it changed the experience, and the amount that it changed it when it was done. It's good practice. But I've also seen myself practice some of these things with music, which is my love and my work, and I've had sometimes experiments where I haven't had as much success, where I'm tipping over into both of these errors that I'm talking about, where I'm really doing it as prayer and from that expanded God consciousness. But I'm not quite down here enough. I'm not quite engaging, that part of me that wanted to be the greatest, and so the experience is very pleasant, but the product is not quite as good. And then I've seen the exact opposite of that, where I do that thing where I get completely lost in the process, forget to check in, and sometimes get a very good product, but it doesn't feel great, and it feels like it drains more energy than it releases. And of course, right, it's no surprise that the place where I've got that most, where I'm most vulnerable to pride, right, that place of the individual, which is the only place that suffers pride, and where I have the most energy and the most gift to be released, that would be the place where there's the bigger challenge than there is in cleaning the kitchen. So the human self is not to be cursed or dismantled, nor is it to be clung to. You don't deconstruct the old thing, you become the new thing little by little, and by the old thing is revealed not to be real. You steadfastly expand your God awareness and practice becoming the Christ in all that you do by dedicating yourself to beauty and reporting to God all that does not appear beautiful. You remain willing to be purified by the light that your willingness invites in, and bear without complaint the temporary discomforts of the light's action. You don't cling to the old self because you have literally nothing to lose. And you go forth joyously, knowing that the process of becoming the real self will proceed according to the law. Well, thank you all so much. I am honored to do my part with all of you, because it is with all of you that it is made valuable and meaningful. And I'm truly humbled and grateful for all of the gifts that you give, for all that I am given.